Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are very welcome to our coverage today. If you don't know us, hi, we're doctors. We mean it when we say the good doctors because we have 2 degrees in social science between us, doctorates. We have other degrees of lower. We're just educated, overly educated folks who love to talk about both lived and popped culture here in the United States, where we live, and around the world. We're pretty much obsessed with it, and we talk about it in any form we can. We use our goal to educate the world about empathy and inclusivity to talk about anything from race and Bridgerton to why you all needed to watch the show Glow until it got canceled, RIP Glow, to why everybody is just a little bit racist and what we can do about it. We love having conversations with each other, as you will find out as you continue to watch this. You should see our Slacks and our WhatsApps and our voice messages. It's all over the show. But we also love to have conversations with you guys, which is why we turn on recording devices. So wherever you are engaging with this content, please make sure like, subscribe, share, rate, review, do all of those things so that we know you're out there and we can keep talking to you.
This video is part of our series called The Colonizers World Tour, which we unabashedly stole the idea from Princess Shuri of Black Panther, and the idea that essentially if you're a white person, you're a colonizer, we're descended from them. And we should know more about what that means and what that looks like. So we're doing a whistle-stop tour around the world in 2021 and organizing the series by colonies. So we're in now chapter 5 of the Colonizers World Tour, season 1, where we're focusing on Portuguese colonies. And you can't do Portuguese colonies without talking about the very biggest one, which is Brazil. So before we get going, we need to put up the strongest of disclaimers we've ever done.
Oh my God, y'all.
On this world tour. So we often say, like, this is just a 101 video. We're dipping our toe in the ocean. That doesn't even feel sufficient for Brazil. What we feel is we are standing on the shore, holding hands, staring at the waves and trying to analyze. So
this is so much.
It's so much. And what we realized too is that, like, we knew pieces of some things and then made assumptions that we knew way more. And it's big. So what we're committing to you to is we're going to talk about Brazil today. We're going to cover a piece of Brazilian rom-com tomorrow, which we're really excited about. But then next year in 2022, we're going to do a whole month on Brazil. And we're going to really dive into it and understand not only the legacy of colonization, but how it has manifested moving forward. So if you are watching this and you are somebody who is very knowledgeable on Brazil or are Brazilian yourself, we would love further resources to consult for that upcoming project. You'll find linked in the show notes our living Google Doc of resources that we've been consulting as we've been trying to wrap our brains around this utterly complex and fascinating place, and that it grieves us on some levels for sure. It's wild. So what we knew ahead of time.
Yeah.
Let's cover that really quick. Dr. Erin, what about you?
I knew that they were very good at football.
Yes.
In America, we call it soccer, but the rest of the world calls it football because you play it with your feet. I knew they had Carnival. I knew about the rainforest and some of the issues going on with deforestation and climate change and all that stuff. I obviously have been a human who watches the news in the last 4 years, so I've heard a lot about their president, Bolsonaro. I also knew from one of our Abbey Research Bibles, Invisible Women, that there were high rates of male violence against women. And because Invisible Women looked at some intersections of transportation and safety for women in favelas, particularly in Rio. So I had, like, as you said, like, skimmed the surface of a couple of things, but even those things I didn't understand, and I still don't fully understand them now, which is why we had the big disclaimer and why we're going to spend a whole month on Brazil. Dr. Kristen, what did you know?
I knew all of that for sure. I also knew that there's a giant statue of Jesus.
Oh yeah, Christ the Redeemer.
Which, yeah, you knew too. I know I want to go, and I always have. And I love Brazilian food. And all of those things. I've also gotten the privilege of sitting in a lot of academic presentations on community building in favelas because they are entirely unregulated by the government, and all resources that you have for life in favelas are resources that you build yourselves. So it's as in my social science and social work life, which is entirely about community and how organized people come together. Favelas are talked about a lot. So I saw that. I knew that race was complicated. I had no idea how complicated. And I knew there was slavery. I didn't realize how much.
So much.
Again, I knew it's like one of those things where I probably would have told you like, oh, I'm not gonna like necessarily be mind blown in Brazil because like I knew about the corruption scandal for the World Cup and the Olympics. I am a rabid watcher of both World Cups and Olympics, so I heard a lot of stuff around that. But then I watched like a 10-minute YouTube video and my jaw was cemented to my chest and I was like, I don't understand Brazil at all. So let's actually break into that right now because you may be in the same boat as us. So Dr. Erin, let's go to the map.
Let's go to the map. We start with demographics, and then we'll get into some of the more complicated stuff as we move along. If you are unfamiliar with the globe, let's go to it and discover where Brazil is. It is in eastern South America, bordering the Atlantic Ocean. It is the largest and most populous country on the continent. And thank you, CIA World Factbook, for their comparisons to states in the United States. It is slightly smaller than the whole United States. This is a very big country. It borders every country in South America except for Ecuador and Chile. The population is at about 213.5 million folks. Most of them live along or near the Atlantic coast in the east, where the biggest cities are, which are Rio de Janeiro, it's not de because it's not Spanish, it's Portuguese, we're learning. Sao Paulo and Brasilia are the three largest. Brasilia is the capital, but only since 1965 when it was literally built to become the new capital, which was one of the things I learned that was fascinating. The official language is Portuguese, obviously, also Spanish. There's a lot of immigrant populations, demographic changes all around parts of Brazil, which means that German, Italian, Japanese, and English are also spoken in various places. And there's also a large number of Amerindian languages from the indigenous populations. Speaking of ethnicity and indigeneity, very, very complicated. Statistically, it's about half white, half-ish pardo, which is a word used to describe mixed race between white and black or black and indigenous peoples. Then there's a population of black identifying folks, but that's growing. Race is very complicated. Everywhere in Brazil, there's a unique Brazilian context, so we can't go obviously just by the numbers. There's a lot of value placed on skin color and treatment of those considered or identifying as black. Discrimination against Black folks is baked into the foundation of Brazil as a legacy of slavery, and they have a culture of erasure and assimilation and silencing. Racism was only codified as a crime in Brazil in 1988 after decades of activism and tackling this myth of a racial democracy. Check our Google Doc links. We've got some really fantastic ones explaining race and Blackness in Brazil. As far as indigeneity, there are 240 recognized tribes that over 900,000 people claim to be part of. The government has recognized 690 territories and reservations for these people groups, taking up 13% of the country's landmass, nearly all of it in the Amazon rainforest. The government has a list of around 80 uncontacted tribes that we don't contact. There are people living in the Amazon rainforest. We have no idea who they are, where they are, why they are, which I think to me is still amazing that there are parts of the world where we don't know humans. Around the time of the Portuguese colonization, the territory of what is now Brazil had an estimated indigenous population of 7 million people. mostly semi-nomadic, who subsisted on hunting, fishing, gathering, and migrant agriculture. The indigenous population of Brazil was comprised of several large ethnic groups: the Tupis, the Guaranis, the Jays, and the Arawaks. The currency in Brazil is the Brazilian real, pretty close to the US dollar, considering some of the more recent currencies that we looked at. One US dollar equals 5 real. The system of government is a federal presidential republic. As we said, it's very big. It has 27 states with very different identities and ethnic makeups that are influenced by geography, industry, slavery and colonization, as well as patterns of immigration and economic development. We're just going to keep saying it's complicated as we go through this because it's complicated. Rounding out the demographics, the religion is mostly Christian. Hey, colonizers. 65% Catholic, 22% Protestant, the rest in other groups. And I will now pass off the baton of demographics to Dr. Kristen, who learned some really interesting things about the Brazilian economy.
So let's talk money. Brazil has a ton of it, and only about like 3% of the population controls it. So that's kind of where it goes. Bolsonaro is a huge part of that, but let's go back before Bolsonaro. So one of the things about the way that country economies work is that they are very tied to a stable political system. How the political system affects the economy, all that kind of stuff, you can't super separate the two. It's very difficult to have a stable economy with an unstable government. In fact, I think it's impossible. Mm-hmm. So Brazil's government is one of the most unstable in its like category of countries it's trying to be. So anybody who's our age or older may remember that at one point around the early 2000s, we were talking about the BRIC countries, the BRICS countries as the future superpowers: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And we're not having that conversation about Brazil that much anymore for a whole lot of reasons, including a massive recession in 15 and 16 that like it is, if the 2008 recession in the United States had gotten as bad as it could have gotten, that is the 2015, 2016 recession. Mm-hmm. The other is how they built their economy, in that they decided to do it very rapidly, which is fair, and entirely on exporting cheap labor to the rest of the world. So they attracted a lot of companies from everywhere else in the world on the basis of cheap labor. Great, cool. The issue is eventually your folks aren't going to be cheap labor anymore, because they're going to get trained, or they're going, as the Irish would say, they're going to get notions, and they're going to want more money, and they're going to want more stability than cheap disposable labor provides. And the bad news for you as a country is that another country is ready to step into that cheap labor market. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with Brazil. So the economy is largely stagnated when we think about growth. There's not the next step of economic growth after industrialization is innovation. And the most successful countries are the ones that, successful economically, are the ones that encourage innovation and industrialization at the same time. Brazil did not do this. Brazil chose industrialization, full throttle, here we go. Other countries have done this as well. So innovation is like one of the things that can save you and have you keep growing. And they don't really have a proportional amount of it. Mm. And to be completely frank, President Bolsonaro has rejected the idea of innovation being important, and believes that the entire future of Brazil is in essentially strip mining the Amazon and selling all of the oil that they've got. Many people disagree with him. So that's kind of the economic thing. It's a mess, and it's going to be a mess for a lot longer, not only because they're massive, but because, and every time you're trying to control that many people, the economy is complicated. Yeah. But because the current leader has such, according to global economists, retrograde ideas about international development, very colonial ideas about how countries grow and evolve, and that are not honestly the best for the largest group of his people, which again, President Bolsonaro has not indicated he cares about. But that's a thing. So that's the money.
Mm.
The next thing we want to just cover really, really quickly is queer life in Brazil. And we can go into the laws, and there's a lovely link in our show notes about the churches for gay folks that are popping up all over Brazil that is very heartwarming, and I would recommend you watch it, and how people are forming community when they've been ostracized, and I, of course, like crying over here. And they talk about marriage and like legal ceremonies and what that looked like. So legality is one thing. Yeah. And I know we normally cover all of that, but what was really striking to us in this is that the legality almost doesn't matter.
Mm.
The rate of danger to life if you are queer is that the statistics are within Brazil that somebody who identifies as queer is murdered every 16 hours. Like, yeah. I can't fathom that.
The life expectancy for trans people is 35 years of age.
35.
Like, I don't care what your laws are, it's not safe.
It's not safe. And it has gotten increasingly unsafe since 2018. We've seen the largest jump of violence against LGBTQIA plus folks since President Bolsonaro's election. Mm-hmm. And that is a statistical reality. There's a documentary that was done by France 24 News that is in our link that interviews some people that moved like immediately upon Bolsonaro's election. They moved to Portugal to obtain safety, and they talk about how their families don't understand them and think they're overreacting and all of those kind of things. So, and for anyone who doesn't know, Bolsonaro has said that he would never let his kids go to Pride. If his son came out as gay, he would physically abuse him. He is very vocal that homosexuality essentially isn't real, that people are just making a choice that doesn't need to be made.
Yeah, and thus corrective rape is employed at high instances against people perceived to be lesbian or gender non-binary. And yeah, it's really, really dark right now in Brazil, really dark.
And as terrible as it is for the generic queer folk umbrella, it's even worse for women somehow specifically.
Yeah, like it's a terrible transition to make, but y'all, it is. It really, really is. Male violence against women in Brazil is horrifically high, astronomically high. It has one of the highest rates of femicide in the entire world. A man beats a woman every 5 minutes in Brazil. I don't even know how long we've been recording this video. 10, 15 minutes, 3 women have been beaten in the time we've been telling you about Brazil. 1 woman is killed every 2 hours. The first bill protecting women from domestic violence passed in 2006. So, and again, you add to this the Bolsonaro of it all, who is has a brand of machismo and misogyny that is tapping into a lot of these regressive attitudes towards women and male violence against women in Brazil. It's really not pretty. It's another colonial legacy. And speaking of, we will wrap up this the happiest section of our video by talking about how Brazil colonized. What I learned that was fascinating was that during the Spanish and Portuguese empires, they just got together for some tea and looked at a map and divided it in half and said, you can have this half and I'll have that half. Cool, Spain and Portugal. Cool, Spain and Portugal. So even though most of South America fell under the Spanish half, hence why it was colonized by Spain, there was a tiny little portion that was mysterious on the Portuguese side. And it was like the coastal part of what is now Brazil. So Portuguese Empire was like, cool, we'll take it. They claimed the land in 1500. The first settlement was 1532, and colonization effectively started in 1534 when King John III divided the territory into 15 private and autonomous captaincy colonies of Brazil.
Like, that sounds like a place where people are wearing polo shirts and Bermuda shorts. You know what I mean? Like, we're all going to meet at the club for some Mai Tais. Like, okay.
Yeah, it's a super,
sure, okay,
super colonizer term there. So as we've always talked about with colonization, resources are the reason, the motivation behind colonization. Sugarcane was massive in Brazil until it wasn't, until they over harvested sugarcane. But they discovered gold in the 1690s and they had a gold rush. And so that was a huge part of the colonization. The Atlantic slave trade was kicked off by the Portuguese. Thanks, Portuguese. I learned that. And what shocked me that I did not know, because the legacy of slavery in the United States is horrific. Just under 5% of enslaved Africans were transported to the United States. Under 5%. 40% of enslaved Africans were trafficked to Brazil.
40%, folks.
40%. They transported 11 times more slaves than the United States. So if wherever you're watching this, you know that the United States is continuing to grapple with the legacy of genocide and slavery on which our country was founded, with 5% of enslaved Africans being forcibly removed and brought here. 40%, like, just magnify all the problems we're having with race and slavery and economy and colonization. Just magnify it, just multiply it literally by 11. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's mad. So how did Brazil get independence? They had a war for it in 1822 to 1825. Portugal was officially recognized Brazil in August of 1825. And then Brazil was one of the last countries to abolish slavery in the entire world, which is not surprising given how much of its economy was dependent on enslaved labor, which they did in 1888. And pretty much since independence, the military took control for a real long time.
Till 1980, like 1985.
1985, there was just a series of military dictatorships. Also something I did not know. But yeah, the first civilian president was 1985. There's been a couple presidents in the 90s and 2000s, one of whom was impeached and removed from office for corruption. She was the predecessor to Bolsonaro. So you now understand, maybe after 20 minutes, why we're going to do a whole month on Brazil next year.
Because we didn't even talk about deforestation.
We didn't talk about the climate, y'all. We didn't even talk about climate change.
Once we hit these walls, we were like, okay, we're just going to do a whole month. Like, doing a whole month.
So I think we have to wrap this up. As much as we could clearly talk about Brazil for the next 6 weeks, please shout out to us resources that you have to help us formulate our topics and discussions for next year. But Dr. Kristen, of all the fire hydrant worth of knowledge, the ocean worth of knowledge we tried to consume, what were the things you wanted to talk about as we end?
So I had no idea it was the largest population of Japanese people outside of Japan.
Me neither.
That was wild. I had no idea. I didn't know the pardo word before. I had never heard that. Learned that the last census divided people into the racial categories of white, black, brown, yellow, and indigenous. And still was continued to affirm that I still want to go and I want to learn more. So those are kind of like my whistle stop tour yourself.
Yeah. Brazil, thanks for reminding us Americans that America's not the only terrible place at things. One of the cool things I learned was that they have a flooded desert.
Yeah, that was rad.
It's so rad, and I want to go. I'm going to butcher this, y'all, because my Portuguese is terrible. But Lenquas...
Our Portuguese is non-existent.
That's better. It's more accurate. My Portuguese is non-existent. Lenquas Marrarenes National Park, located in the Maranhão state in northeastern Brazil. Just Google it. It looks like the coolest thing ever.
Coolest place.
I would love to go. I learned a lot more about favelas because was not a social worker or a sociologist in my past lives, so I did not sit in all those papers that I would have loved to hear. So I learned a lot about that. I learned that 97% of those living in favelas don't have access to healthcare.
It's wild.
I learned that marginalized groups, rather obviously, suffered the most during the pandemic. And we've seen this. It's been in the news a lot for its response to the pandemic and its high rates of death and transmission. There's overcrowding in favelas, which is the same in a lot of marginalized Black and Brown communities around the world, especially in the United States, but also the isolation of indigenous groups in the rainforest and the difficulty of getting to them for medical treatment. So that was, an interesting combination. I would like to leave with something very sad that also shocked me. They have a huge problem with police violence.
This was insane.
Way. I thought we were the worst with police killings. I really did.
No, we're just the worst with gunfire.
It must be because we have more guns.
Yeah.
So in the US, there is one police death, where a person
death by police violence.
Police violence, death by police violence. I'm trying to say it in an active way. For every 37,000 arrests in the United States.
Not great.
Not great. There's a lot of arrests. Ratio, not super good. In Brazil,
not the best.
Brazil, it's one death by police officer for every 23 arrests.
23.
I just...
Baffling.
Wow. So now I want to do a whole week on our month of Brazil on Black Lives Matter. Because what did that look like in a country? And it's I forget, 56% of the population can be considered Black, and 70-80% of police deaths are Black people killed by police. So disproportionate it is in the United States as well. But man, that totally, that shocked me in a world in which very little shocks me.
But the thing is, in the middle of all of this, people are still living their lives. There's still joy, and people are still falling in love. So we're going to watch a rom-com.
We're going to watch a rom-com. That's how we're going to transition out of this crazy legacy of Brazil. So we will see you next in the Colonizers World Tour for our coverage of love.com, and we're excited.
We are. See you guys then.
Bye.